We're delighted to have both of these men today, and without any further delay, I'm going to introduce Jeremy and let him take over the program. So thanks again for coming.
Great. Well, guys, it is a pleasure to join you today, and thank you, Dr. Gates, for the invitation. I had reached out, or he had reached out to me and said, "Hey, will you fill in for Justin?" And then I said, "Well, you know, are you sure you want a newbie doing this?" And he assured me that he did. And so we're delighted to be able to share with you a little bit about Habitat for Humanity. So, has anyone here volunteered for Habitat for Humanity in the past? Okay, good. We will, what I'm going to do today is I'm going to give you a little bit of the history of Habitat for Humanity, how it got started, and then just kind of share with you how it's impacted me over the last year. And then I've got Mike here, and he has been building houses for Habitat for 5 years plus. And so I wanted him to be able to share his experience from a volunteer standpoint with you guys today. So my name is Jeremy McClish. I am the Director of Operations for Habitat for Humanity of Greater Fort Wayne. And so we serve Allen County, Huntington County, and Wells County. And Habitat for Humanity was founded in 1976. But it was really born out of the civil rights movement. Millard Fuller is the founder of Habitat for Humanity International. But it was really Clarence Jordan who was the spiritual founder, the spiritual father, or an influencer of Habitat for Humanity. So in 1942, and again, Habitat was founded in 1976, so almost 30 years before Habitat was founded, this farmer and Bible scholar named Clarence Jordan started a community of believers. And there were a few other families, and they started this community that they called Koinonia Farms. And it was in southwest Georgia, just outside of Americus, Georgia. And they wanted a place that they could model the early church that they saw in Acts 2 and Acts 4. They wanted a place where they could devote themselves to the Bible's teaching and to fellowship and to the breaking of bread and prayer that we read about in Acts 2:42. That's why they named it Koinonia Farm. Clarence Jordan was, as I said, a Bible scholar, and he was an expert in Greek language. And koinonia in Greek means fellowship. It means community fellowship. It means communion, and they wanted to also live communally. And as Acts goes on to say in chapter 2, verses 44 and 45, the early believers lived together. They had everything in common. They sold possessions and goods and gave to everyone as they had need. And so this group of believers started this community, and early on, Koinonia Farm, they raised chickens and crops, and they would sustain themselves through those, but then anything extra they would take and they would sell to the neighboring town of Americus and some other towns in the area. And that's how they would sustain themselves. And they also had some roadside markets that they would sell some of their goods in. But they envisioned this place where people were treated equally, where resources were shared, and they shared this great sense of responsibility to steward the land. And so it was out of this context that Koinonia Farms was built, and then the impact that had on Millard Fuller. So as Koinonia Farms got up and running, when they could afford to, they would hire seasonal help. And at Koinonia Farms, black and white workers were paid equally, and they were treated fairly. And this was a big deal, because in the South, it was still very much segregated, and black workers were not paid as much as white workers. And as a community, Koinonia said, we are going to treat everyone equally. And when Koinonia and its guests and workers, when they prayed together, when they shared meals together, they were all at the same table, black and white. And as they began to, they were integrated racially. And this began to create a lot of heat for them because the South was not integrated at this time. But Clarence felt very strongly that in Christ, there is neither Greek nor Jew, slave nor free, male or female. You are all one in Christ. We see that in Galatians 3. And in the South, in this South Georgia setting, Clarence believed that that statement meant there should be no difference and no distinction between black and white, neither Jew nor Greek. And there certainly should be no discrimination against anybody. Well, these views that the Jordan family and then the others that were doing life together at Koinonia Farms, they were not very popular. And there was this racial equality was not a popular in their area, and they were actually excommunicated from the church that they were attending. And that was in 1950. And then in the mid to late 1950s, feelings about integration in the South were really intense. And Koinonia's commitment to racial equality, to nonviolence, to economic sharing was again not very popular, and they received a lot of persecution. There were boycotts on the Koinonia products from local businesses, and that began in 1956 and continued for 10 or so years. Roadside markets got bombed. The KKK and other organizations were trying to force them out. And their response to this was prayer, some nonviolent resistance, and a renewed commitment to live the gospel. That's why they had come together in the first place, was to actively live out the gospel. So they couldn't sell their products anywhere, and they were kind of stuck. And they ended up, as God often does, provided. So they started a mail order business that still today helps this community thrive. And it's still used to sustain this community today. So fast forward to 1960. Millard Fullard, who is the founder of Habitat, graduates from law school. And he starts a business that is wildly successful. So he is a successful lawyer, he's a successful businessman, and he became a millionaire by the time he was 29 years old. And while his company's going great, as you can imagine, his business is prospering, but his health, his marriage, his integrity are all starting to suffer. He is investing so much time into his to his company that his family was receiving the impact of that. And I don't know exactly how it went down, but at some point his wife sat him down and said, exactly what she said, of course, but I'm not happy. I don't know if I love you anymore. I don't know who you are anymore. I don't know if I can stay in this marriage type of conversation. And this wrecked Millard. And it was a wake-up call for him. And so he started to reevaluate his situation, his values, and it was a trip to New York City that he took with his wife, Linda. And it was at that trip that some big decisions were made. They first of all reconciled their marriage, and they renewed their Christian commitment and their commitment to one another. And then the Fullers took a very drastic step. They decided that they were going to sell Millard's portion of the company, and they were going to take all of their money and give it to the poor. And then they were going to look for a way that they could focus their energy and their efforts and serve Christ. And Millard wrote, "We wanted to make ourselves poor again in order to rekindle our own love relationship and to put ourselves right with God." So the Fullers were coming back from this trip to New York City, and they wanted to stop and see some friends who were staying at Koinonia Farms. So what they thought was going to be a couple of hours turned into a month. And they got the chance to meet and talk with Clarence Jordan. And they were really drawn to the people at Koinonia Farm because they were on the same path that they were pursuing, that the Fullers were pursuing. They were trying to figure out, what does it look like to live out our faith practically? And Millard and Clarence would have conversation after conversation about theology, about that practical Christian living and discipleship. What does that look like? And ultimately, Millard and Linda Fuller, their decision to stay and their connection with Clarence Jordan ultimately led to the creation of Habitat for Humanity. So in those conversations with Clarence, that they really began to, Millard began to formulate his thinking and his theology, and Clarence had a huge impact on his thinking. And those early conversations are where things began to take root in what would later become known as the theology of the hammer. This is a book that Millard Fuller put out in the 90s that kind of espoused Habitat for Humanity, and we'll get into the theology of the hammer in a couple of minutes. But so these early conversations really helped form Millard Fuller. And it was Clarence Jordan. He was a no-nonsense type of guy. And for him, it was all about action. And he had this, he espoused this expression of Christianity that he felt this deep desire to match both word and deed. And this motivated him. How do we match what we say we believe to action? And this motivated him and the Fullers to seek ways to express God's love to their neighbors. And most of their neighbors were poor. So how could they express God's love to their poorer neighbors? And Koinonia Farm got this idea, and they changed their name to Koinonia Partners in 1968. And the reason is this small community started to take several projects on. And their primary focus of these projects is what they called partnership housing. And this is where the idea for Habitat was born. So this idea of partnership housing, they believed that what poor people needed was not charity. They needed capital. They needed a way to get a step out of their situation. So Clarence Jordan and Millard Fuller, along with some other members of the Koinonia community, came up with this plan to develop a fund that they called, it's a revolving fund that they called Fund for Humanity. And this is the idea. This is how the initial plan was supposed to work. The fund would take in donations, okay? And those donations would be used to purchase building materials. And then they would take volunteer laborers with these materials that they just purchased through donated dollars. The volunteer laborers would then construct a simple, decent house that was safe, along with the family who was going to live there. So the idea is they were working together, and the family is building pride and ownership and dignity in this process of building their house alongside these other people who have volunteered their time. Then the homeowner would repay the cost of those building materials at zero interest. And so so they designed it this way so that it was not just a giveaway program, right? But as these funds were repaid, they went back into building more houses. That was the initial idea, and out of that is what came Habitat for Humanity. So Miller does this for like 5 years with Koinonia Partners, right? And then in 1973, he moves his family to Africa. And they moved to Zaire, which is now the Democratic Republic of the Congo. And they kind of put this model to the test, and they found it very successful. So they did that for 3 years, and then they came back to the States. And in 1976, when they came back to the States, they founded Habitat for Humanity. Habitat now works in nearly 1,400 communities across the U.S. It's in approximately 70 countries, and has helped more than 13 million people achieve strength and stability and independence through decent and affordable shelter. So that's how Habitat came to be, okay? And I came to, as Dr. Gates said, I came to Habitat a little over a year ago, and I look back over my career, and God really has been preparing my heart. This is my first stint in the nonprofit world. All of my previous jobs in my career has all been in corporate, for-profit business world. And so in my mind, I'm like, I'm a business guy, but profits didn't motivate me. But what motivates me is being able to help as many people as possible. So that's where God has been working in my heart to prepare me for ministry with a business mind, but a heart to serve. In the past decade or so, God has been teaching me a ton about community. The ranch I spent a lot of time at was a great place for us to learn and experience community, similar to this Koinonia farm, potentially. I was learning a lot about dependence on God, and what does that really look like day in and day out. And now in the past year, I've been learning a lot about the power of the theology of the hammer. So the theology of the hammer, to sum it up, all right, this is the theology of the hammer. So in our Christian faith, the Bible mandates that we do more than just talk about our faith. The Bible mandates that we do more than sing about songs of love. We have to put faith and love into action. That's the way faith and love come alive and become real for people. So the hammer is, in Fuller's mind, or in Millard's mind, the hammer is an instrument of love. It doesn't matter what church you come from. It doesn't matter what denomination you come from. It doesn't matter what religion you espouse. The hammer doesn't see any of those. The hammer doesn't care about how much money you make. The hammer doesn't care about what color of skin you have. The hammer is there to serve. And so in Habitat context, the theology of the hammer literally and repeatedly is hit, and over and over and over, until the home for a needy person is built. So this is the great equalizer. And it doesn't matter, we believe that everyone has something to bring and something to gain from volunteering their time to help someone in need. That is the great equalizer. So I heard President Carter say, he has never experienced another organization that has the ability to bring both rich and poor people together to work side by side. I've heard stories of Christians and Muslims and Jews and all working together for one cause, a family who is in need of affordable, decent shelter. So that's the gist of the theology of the hammer. It's about bringing people together to serve. Ephesians 4, and in verse 7 says, "But to each one of us grace has been given as Christ apportioned it." And then it goes on to say in verse 11, it was Christ, who gave some to be apostles, some to be prophets, some to be evangelists, some to be pastors and teachers." And then he says, why? In verse 12, "To prepare God's people for works of service so that the body of Christ may be built up until we all reach unity in faith and in the knowledge of the Son of God and become mature, attaining the whole measure of the fullness of Christ." So if you go to church, your pastor's job, the reason your pastor is in their position, is to prepare you, God's people, for works of service. It is not the pastor or the church's job to serve. It's our job as the church to do the serving. And I love what it says earlier in Ephesians in chapter 2. "For it is by grace you have been saved, through faith. And this is not from yourself, this is a gift of God, so that no one can boast. For we are God's workmanship, created in Christ Jesus to do good works, which God prepared in advance for us to do." So God created us to do good works. He prepared those works for us in advance, and He gave us a pastor to teach us how to do it. Praise God, amen, hallelujah. That is awesome. I love it. And then we go into James. And James tells us, "What good is it, my brother, if a man claims to have faith but has no deeds? Can such faith save him? In the same way, faith by itself, if not accompanied by action, is dead." Then he talks about Abraham, and down in chapter 2, verse 21. "Was not our ancestor Abraham considered righteous for what he did when he offered his son Isaac on the altar? You see that his faith and his actions were working together, and his faith was made complete by what he did." So God is preparing works of service for us. James tells us that our faith without action is dead. And that was what Clarence and Millard felt so passionately about. This word and deed need to be mixed. They need to, for our faith to be real and come alive, we have to be able to mix those two and serve. One of the things that Millard writes in his book is and this is Millard Fuller, right? He says, "I have always seen Habitat for Humanity as a servant of the church. In this ministry, we are neither a church nor a kind of denomination. We are non-denominational and non-doctrinal," right? That's what Habitat is. It is not a church. But the first purpose in our official articles of incorporation states clearly our Christian foundation. We are to witness to the gospel of Jesus Christ throughout the world by working in cooperation with God's people in need to create a better habitat for which to live and work. We work with Catholic and Protestant, Christian and other faith groups, black, white, sacred, secular, liberal, conservative, business, civic, and innumerable other creative alliances. These wide-ranging partnerships are central to the theology of the hammer. Habitat brings people together to serve others. He goes on to say, "My dream from the outset of the ministry of Habitat for Humanity has been for our work to be a new frontier in Christian missions. Habitat is not, has not been, and will not be an evangelical organization." And this seems crazy to some people. How can you be a mission without the focus being on evangelism? He says, we're not an evangelical organization that seeks to convert people. Rather, we aggressively demonstrate God's love by all that we do. This work is a new mission field, an environment where people who normally do not work together can do so. Again, bringing people together to the betterment of the community and to the tangible benefits of those who are in need. Tangible. We are serving families in need, coming together to do it. We have a way of exercising our faith through our works and our service, doing it together. Very often, so much more gets built than just a house. So the theology of the hammer. We can all pick up a hammer. We can all swing a hammer. We can all help a family in need and do it together. And we can aggressively, in doing so, we can aggressively demonstrate the love of Jesus Christ. So Habitat's mission is to seek to put God's love into action by bringing people together to build homes, communities, and hope. And the way we do this is we do it, number one, by demonstrating the love of Jesus Christ. Number two, we focus on shelter. There's lots of things that we can do, but Habitat's focus is on decent, affordable place for people to live. We advocate for affordable housing. We promote dignity and hope. Like I said earlier, we believe everybody has something to bring to the table and something to gain from their experience of service. And we support sustainable and transformational development. For us to consider something successful, there's a few things that need to happen. One, we want it to transform lives in a positive way and lasting way. Two, we want to make sure that it is a successful build, a successful family get into a home is, it is successful when it's based on mutual trust and fully shared by all involved. And number three, we want to be a good steward of all the resources that we have. So I want to introduce to you now, I want to bring up Mike Cooker, and he is one of our lead volunteers. And Mike has been building with Habitat on the job site for 5 years. So Mike, come on up. And tell us a little bit about your experience as a volunteer and what it means to you.
Jeremy's talking about service and service to the Lord, and Jesus Christ tells us to put into service our time, our talents, our treasures. Well, my wife and I have consistently given our treasures to our church, but then I had time on my hands, obviously, and I had a certain talent. My hobby for 20 years prior to retirement was building furniture. And my kids and grandkids have houses full of free furniture that I built for them. But then I needed something more. And I was aware of Habitat, familiar with Habitat. I turned to Habitat 5 years ago and said, is there some way that I could put into service my time and my talents? And as it turns out, they were very open to my joining them. And so for the last 5 years, I've been working on the construction site. They have taught me everything I needed to know about building a house, everything from framing a house from the very beginning to installing appliances, to installing trim, the baseboard, and installing windows, doors. I personally don't do any painting, but there's plenty of painting to be done. So I was able to put into action my time and my talents, and it has served me very well. It's been a very uplifting experience for me, and I know firsthand that it has been wonderful for a large number of families. We're currently building a development, an entire housing development out on Cook Road, just west of Huguenard. And it's actually, the name of the subdivision is Fuller's Landing, in honor of Millard Fuller, who founded Habitat. We're currently building house number 40 and 41, and we have about 70 more to go over the next several years. So there's plenty of work to do. So there's lots of opportunities for you to join us at Habitat, do any number of these jobs. There's also opportunities if you don't care for the construction site. There's also opportunities within the office. For example, one thing is that these partner families go through an extensive training program. Imagine for a moment, we have a number of Burmese refugees that are now living in our homes in Fuller's Landing. They came from a refugee camp. I got to know one gentleman quite well. Prior to coming here, he had been in the Burmese army, and then the military took over, and now it's called Myanmar. He and his family lived in a refugee camp for 3 years in a tent while they were waiting to be able to come to the United States. He comes to the United States now, and imagine he has no idea. Own a home? What does that mean? He doesn't understand our electrical system. He doesn't understand mowing a grass. He doesn't understand what do I do if I have a plumbing problem. So there's an extensive training program that Jeremy and the staff provide to these homeowners to make sure they're going to be good solid homeowners. There's a teaching opportunity there for volunteers as well. If you like travel, there's an enormous number of opportunities. You like to travel? Jeremy mentioned international, Habitat International, 70 countries. Right at the very moment, my brother and his wife are in Vietnam, touring Vietnam for a couple of weeks, and then next week they're in a Habitat home built in Cambodia. So, and they've been to they've been to Peru, they've been to Portugal, they've been to Chile, they've been to Nepal. So there's plenty of opportunities within Habitat, and it's just simply a very rewarding experience to come out and do the work, perform that service for these folks. Hopefully, if the day is right and the family can be there, you'll get to know the family and understand more about their situation. We don't have, I don't consider the Fort Wayne Allen County area as having a real challenging issue with affordable housing, and what I mean by that is the people that we are building houses for are not coming from real bad situations. A lot of the times it's an overpriced apartment where they have a family of 5 living in a 2-bedroom apartment, something like that, but we're giving them an opportunity to be a homeowner, to build up equity, to give each of their children in school their own bedroom, a place to study, that sort of thing. I mention that because I'm fortunate enough, my wife and I spend the winters in Florida. We'll leave all that snow to you folks now. So we go down to Florida, and actually is Naples, Florida, and the Naples or the Collier County Habitat for Humanity down there is the largest in the country. They build 100 houses a year. But those people down in that particular part of the country, there's been a number of people who have been living in an old container. Their whole family was living in a container, you know, the ship containers. They've been living in a container, and so Habitat provided them with affordable housing. And there's been a number of really sad stories down in that area of the country, which has a lot more immigrants than what we have, and a lot more lower income folks. So Habitat does wonderful things all over the world. You can participate all over the world, and we'd love to have you start by participating out at our site sometime if you're inclined to do some construction work. And I know you've all got jobs and you got school classes and all that. We work Wednesday through Saturday, so Saturdays are always available. A couple of years ago, we had a group from the what was then the IPFW women's volleyball team came out and worked one day. That was a lot of fun to get to know those ladies and learn where they were from, and I think they enjoyed their time too. So So again, it's the service. It's an opportunity to put into action the service that Jesus asks us to perform as a part of our faith.
I want to be sensitive to your time. I'm so appreciative of you all coming today. Do you have any questions? Yes. Well, let me get the...
We're going to pass the mic around here so that they can pick it up on camera, what you're asking.
Okay, for someone who has like no knowledge or experience in construction, where would they start if they wanted to volunteer to help?
Yeah, so we have signups online, and there's no experience necessary. So Mike, for example, is one of our construction leads. And so you come out, you sign up online, and you come out on the day that that it works. And we have a couple of folks that are paid staff, and then the majority of our workforce are all volunteers, just like Mike. And so Mike would say, okay, we're going to frame this wall today. Who wants to learn how to use a nail gun? And he walks you through how to do everything. And Mike's really good about this because he's a really great instructor, and he's really great at stepping back and then letting you try it.
We have, oh boy, how many are there? 12 or 15 people who we call crew leads, are folks like me that come out to the site on a regular basis, and they've been doing it for many, many years. We have a couple of gentlemen who are in the now 200s, the 200th house that they've been involved in here or elsewhere in the country, because they do some of that. They go around the country and help build. So we have this group of 12 or 15 people who have learned, are very knowledgeable. Actually, none of them came from the construction home building industry. They're like me. They all learned it on the job from their predecessors. And so we will walk you through it. I will show you how to do whatever task you would like to participate in, and then we let you go do it. We just monitor it to make sure it's done correctly, because there are certain building codes that we have to comply with, that sort of thing. But we want to make sure that it's a good quality home.
And that's right in line with the original vision of Habitat, right? Like, they're using volunteer labor to keep the cost minimal, so it can still be affordable for folks.
Any other questions?
I'm curious about how long does it take to build a house, and how do what's the criteria for people to be the beneficiaries of a house?
Yep, great question.
And then the third thing is, are you building just at Fuller's Landing right now, or are you building elsewhere around Fort Wayne?
So I'll try to pick those off one at a time. So we look for three things with families that enter into our program. So the first requirement is need. So you have to have a need for housing. And if you're a renter, then you have that need. Now within that, there are various degrees of need, right? If, as Mike was saying, if you're in an overcrowded situation, that might escalate you, put you higher on the need list. If you are you're in a bad rent situation where the house is falling apart, that'll rank you higher on the needs list. So there has to be a need for housing. There has to be an ability to pay, because we don't give away free houses. We offer affordable houses at zero or zero equivalent mortgages. Right now our homeowners are getting mortgages at zero interest, and that is saving them a ton of money over the lifetime of that mortgage. But they have to be gainfully employed and have the ability to pay back a mortgage. Now there are thresholds that we use according to HUD, and so this is for a lower income folks. And so some people come in and they are maybe underqualified, and some people come into our program or apply to our program, and they're overqualified. And so here's the tough thing that we have to try to battle is the interest and the need and the demand for our program is very high. And right now we are limited just by the number of houses we can build. And so some of that has to do with, most of that has to do with funding. And so right now we build maybe 10 houses a year. But we have hundreds of people that apply a year and are interested in the program. So like you were saying down in Florida, they're building 100 houses a year, and the need is there in Fort Wayne. People have, there are a lot of low-income folks who are in need of affordable housing. But those are, so there has to be need, there has to be ability to pay, and then probably the most, the biggest strength of our program is what we look for is we call the willingness to partner. So all of our families have to put in up to 400 hours of what we call sweat equity. So they are volunteering their time to build their house. They're volunteering their time to build their neighbors' houses. They might be volunteering some of their time at the restore. And we also put them through home education. So that's going to include some financial literacy. And these folks have rented primarily their whole lives. So we take them through home ownership classes. What does it look like to actually own a home? How do you budget for repairs? How do you plan for repairs? Your mortgage payment is not the same as your rent payment because you have to set money aside for the water heater going out and things like that. So that process takes about a year and a half, about 18 months to get in all the sweat equity and go through all the classes. And then it's just a matter of the timing of the build schedule and how many houses we can build a year. And so we tend to always have this three-legged stool that we're trying to balance. And that is funding, that is the number of volunteers that we need to get the houses built, and that is families in the program that are ready for a home. And usually it's really tough to get those all three perfect. So sometimes we have the families, we have the volunteers, but we just don't have the funding to build all the houses we want that year. Sometimes we've got the families that are in the program, they're just not quite ready yet. And sometimes we've got the work, we just, for whatever reason, don't have the volunteers. So it's always this balancing act. And it typically, if everything is on target, we can usually build a house in about 10 to 12 weeks, just a normal build. Would you agree with that?
Right, and a lot of it depends on the number of volunteers that we do get out to help us. The crew leads, there's usually only 2 or 3 or 4 of us on any particular day, so we rely heavily on volunteers such as yourself. We get volunteer groups from various churches around the area, from businesses, from other groups, community groups. We have a good number of volunteers that come out every year, but what I'm going to do is put Dr. Gates on the spot and say, here's a campus ministry, an excellent opportunity to put together a group to come out to Habitat some Saturday.
That's a great idea. And the best part is you've got 2 of our student leaders sitting here listening to you.
Okay.
Who are looking for service projects.
Perfect.
Okay.
And let me share a story with you real quickly. We just launched a build at the end of the month, the end of September, down in Huntington. And so this is the first that we've built in Huntington. We merged with the Huntington affiliate last year, and this is the first that Habitat has built a home in Huntington for about 4 years. So the community was ready for it, and we had, the day that we had gone out to frame the house, we had community leaders from Huntington on site framing walls alongside this young mom who was so excited to start framing the walls of her house. They're working side by side. She's working with the mayor, the chief of police, the fire marshal on her house, and they're all there for her. And I got to tell you, it was there's something about, especially framing day, right? When the walls go up for the first time and the families put in all this hard work, right? They've been working toward this for a year and a half, and they finally get to see the walls of their forever home go up. And you get to be a part of that, and you get to build side by side, and you get to swing a hammer, and you get to see at the end of the day what you've accomplished and know. And the family's not always on site, but that is really cool when they are, because you get to see and hear their story and see firsthand the impact that the hammer you swung that day is going to have on that family. And that is a really, really satisfying experience. And in my opinion, and I think Mike would agree with me as well, it is a wonderful way to demonstrate the love of Jesus Christ.
What's the follow-up on those that occupy the houses? Let's say 3 years, 5 years down the road, what do you see?
So we have, the way I view it is, once we build for a family, we're forever part of that family. And so we have several touch points throughout the year where we're trying to make sure that we have social opportunities for families to come together and share their stories and encourage one another. We have education opportunities where they can come back and take a class on, earlier this year we had, for our homeowners, we had a class on landscaping. We had one of a local landscaper that came in and gave some tips on how to do some landscaping. So we want to serve them through educational opportunities. And there's several touch points like that throughout the year that we want to keep them engaged and be able to come alongside and serve how we can. Does that answer the question?
Well, the other part of it is then how many of them are successful? Are they all successful way down the road, or do you see some falling away, not able to meet the mortgage obligation?
Yes, that does happen. What was the statistic? I want to say that we were 95% successful over the 30 years that we've been in Fort Wayne, something along those lines. So yeah, we have a whole process in place, and so it happens, right? People that are living paycheck to paycheck, we're often one paycheck away from losing our home. And so we try to work with our families, and there's some hardship assistance that's available that we try to put them in touch with, access those funds that the government provides. There's lots of things that we do to try to work with families. But life happens, and we do have some families that don't. But that's part of our program, and we want to try to make sure that through the process we're setting them up to be successful homeowners. And that ability to pay is an important piece of that. We don't want to put somebody in a situation that, or a home that they can't afford.
So do you handle the funding of the building materials still, or is the mortgage through a bank? In other words, are they paying you back, or are they paying a bank back? How does that work?
Lots of different ways, but primarily we originate the mortgage and own the mortgage, but we have a bank that services the mortgage. So they make a payment to a bank, but the mortgage belongs to us, if that makes sense.
So the house would go back to you
Correct.
if they didn't make their mortgage payments?
Yep. Majority of the time, that's the case.
When you look at the development you're doing out on Cook Road, and you mentioned Burmese, and I don't mean this in a negative way, I hope it's in a positive way, that it doesn't end up being an all Burmese community or something like that, but that there's some integration with other groups so that everybody learns how to integrate. Is that true?
Well, again, I'm not sure I'm answering your question, but we're not looking to hit numbers. We are basing our decisions 100% on the need. So it turns out that I couldn't give you the percentages, but there's a mix of all different groups of people that live in Fuller's Landing. It's not like we don't necessarily target a specific group or not. We can't, legally we can't do that. We're an equal opportunity lender, and we don't, but it's not even a consideration. We're not looking at any of those. We're strictly looking at the need, the ability to pay, and a willingness to partner.
Does anybody else have a question they want to ask? Okay, maybe Jeremy, Mike, any last thoughts you'd like to share?
I mean, I guess that's my last thought would be, remember the theology of the hammer, right? And we feel that it doesn't matter what your experience is with building. It doesn't matter what you think you can bring to the table or can't bring to the table. It's an opportunity to serve. And so if you're looking for that opportunity to serve and give back to a needy family, check us out online. Come visit a job site, and we would love to have you be able to swing a hammer and impact a family. Mike?
Oh, I would just say that when you do come out to join us, I will most likely be there. So make sure you remind me that you survived this presentation.
Thank you so much.
Let's thank Jeremy and Mike for coming today.
Les personnages dans mes tableaux, à me voir vivre en décroché, mes idées folles de